So these things are very important into our anchoring, into our ability of having that reflection, that skill set to be able to see ourselves thriving in this environment. And so the data shows that while the stress, the burnout, the fatigue, and all of these things are very much at play, there are strategies that we can take that makes it a little bit more manageable, right? And so it's not paralyzing. And that's going to bring us into our second section, which is, what does a wellness framework look like from a longitudinal standpoint? So we'll break this part of the discussion down into about three pieces, right?
Okay.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is mindfulness, mindful breathing, and visualization.
All right.
That piece is coming back, visualizing, right? Now, let's can we do a quick exercise? Can you be my
Let's do an
volunteer?
exercise.
All right.
Sure.
So I want you to close your eyes. I'm gonna give you the directions first. Breathe deeply in for 4 seconds. You're gonna hold for 4 seconds, and then you're going to exhale for 6 seconds. And in the midst of doing that, I want you to picture yourself as a student, a young Turk, Dean Taylor, entering into an exam room, calm, confident, collected, and grounded. Breathe deeply in for 4. Hold for 4. Breathe out. Okay, come back.
Do I have to come back? I was on a journey to success.
Yeah, so how did, and I know that this is like, just real quick, but if you really went there in your mind, as anecdotal as that exercise may have been, how did that make you feel?
There's a very calming feeling because by slowing your breathing, first you feel like you're in control because you're controlling your breathing. And as you had me visualize like an examination room, and I've taken many exams over the years, I was, letting the breath out slowly, but imagine myself going to this room. And because I was letting it out slowly, I felt like I had control. Normally, we're trying to rush to the room. I got to get to the seat. I'm feeling a little anxious and nervous. The exam is coming. But it was almost like everything was in slow motion. I was just like, okay, I'm going to the room. And I had just opened the door just a little way, and you brought me back. I was like, I'm about to go in here.
You didn't get a chance to
That's
sit
right.
down and start
That's
yet.
right.
Okay.
However, it was great because I felt I had a sense of calm, but with the calmness came a sense of control. And just reflecting on what it's like to go into an exam room, a lot of times initially I feel like we're going in a little anxious and I don't have control until I see what's in front of me on the exam.
Right.
So it was a very sort of interesting and helpful experience.
Right. And so these mindfulness practices are put in place to help our students do what we call cognitive restructuring, right? And they're techniques, and you brought up a lot of parts. So we have the visualization portion, as in I'm seeing myself enter into the door. That breath that you're saying, it's funny you say that because I remember having a conversation some time back and saying I had to kind of teach myself how to breathe again, like the Tony Braxton song, Breathe
Yes.
Again, but you get so used to in these high stakes, high paced environments, I'm breathing quick and shallow, but we talk about this diaphragmatic breathing, where we're opening up that thorax and we're kind of giving our, nervous system that shock to kind of tone down. And so many of these things, so some of the techniques in that is called mindfulness attention training. And in science, they reported about a 44% reduction in rumination frequency. So this is going back to those academic saboteurs, AKA the thought distortions, right? If we just simply have awareness in the moment through changing our breathing patterns, right? This allows us to reduce our sense or our affinity to ruminate. And then we have what we also call somatic awareness training. And this is something that MBME John Hopkins has reported, where if you can recognize things such as bruxism, which is like grinding of your teeth,
Okay.
tightness of the jaw, the TMJ, eye strain. These are early cues of burnout. So a lot of times these things are happening beyond our conscious level as well. And it's it's always funny because in the hospitals that I've been in, we've used these depression scales, right? PHQ-9, and they ask these very specific questions to be able to gauge the level of depression that our patient is experiencing right now. It's a snapshot, right? And this ties into what we talked about in the previous section, where being able to, in real time, identify when your wellness is off, right?
Yes.
And so when I talk about these depression scales that we use, oftentimes they don't include these somatic symptoms. So when I'm meditating in the morning, before I even jump into my meditation, right? So this is a every morning practice. I get up, first thing I do, go and handle my toiletry things, hygiene stuff, and then go right back into the room and I meditate. And that awareness bringing me in, before I even start like the numbering and the counting with my meditation, I do a top to bottom, crown of my head to the soles of my feet survey of how I feel, any tightness in my body, right? Because this awareness, this mindfulness, is allowing you information, data into how you have to, maybe change things up in your strategy, your day to day, what particular things within your toolkit, your wellness strategy toolkit that you might need to employ for that day, but tying that into the emotional intelligence. One, we talked about being able to in real time catch and label some of these automatic negative thoughts, but then that mindfulness allows you to kind of have that data to be able to contextualize it. So this is the structuring, the cognitive restructuring piece of bringing somatic awareness and attention into your practice. So those are some things that we can do from the mindfulness, breathing, and visualization. That brings us into our second segment of our longitudinal wellness framework, and that's cognitive reframing. Now, cognitive reframing is a cornerstone of cognitive behavioral therapy, or AKA CBT, right?
Okay. Not cognitive. I always like to ask that fancy word for how we're thinking. What's our thought process about something? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're gonna reframe our thought process.
Reframing our thought process, right? And so, we practice this with ourselves. A lot of times when we're doing CBT, we're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy from the context of a therapist with a patient, right? But a lot of times we can do cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, on ourselves. So turning I'm going to fail into I have prepared, right?
Yes.
And I'll do my best is something that we can do with ourselves without the help. But then bringing in that community aspect, that mentor aspect, that supporting cast aspect into the conversation, that also allows that reframing, because you're getting that external support of reframing what your current situation might be, and how if you rely on your thought distortions, your thought errors, that mental saboteur is going to come peeking its ugly head through. So
it's so important, DJ, that just listening to you and I'm reflecting back on the GPS model, because as we look at each of these longitudinal strategies now to help us with our wellness, this is why it's so important to be anchored in. You still have to have the growth mindset. You have to have purpose and relevance, and you need a sense of belonging.
Right.
If I'm restructuring and reframing my thought process, that's helped by, I have a growth mindset. I don't know if I'm going to do well on this exam, versus I'm going to continue to prepare for this exam because I believe I can do it. And by the way, growth mindset, I'm doing it because I'm trying to be the best to help my future patient, purpose and relevance.
Right.
And by the way, I have DJ who's going to help me with this difficult part of my studying, sense of belonging. So with all those three, that connection with all those three, I can reframe the thought.
Right.
I can use the GPS to reframe my thoughts.
Right.
So they are linked together.
Exactly. And so all of that works into, these practices that we do within cognitive reframing. And so one of the things is talking about visualization. Now, this is something that we talked about earlier with mindfulness and mindful breathing, and then also the GPS with these affirmations and self-identity or professional identity, seeing yourself, right? It's visualization practices. And Harvard Med showed a 35% improvement in performance consistency. So this is that avoidance behavior, the academic saboteurs coming in, and it's creating this stress and this burnout, which then is allowing you to have avoidant behavior around your academics. You're looking at it as, I'm a procrastinator, which is more academic saboteur, more negative self-conscious thoughts, so subconscious thoughts, right? But if we practice actually seeing ourselves doing this, visualization practices, 35% improvement in performance consistency. Ritualized preparation routines, and this is a good one, 30% increase in emotional readiness. Now, that activity that we did before with you visualizing the breaths, that was a routine. That was a ritualized routine, but it can be anything from, going to the gym in the morning before an exam, getting a certain amount of miles in a bike or on a run before an exam. All of these particular things are ritualized practices, which I like to call adds to this kind of imaginary happiness jar. And it's just like in the morning. One of the other things that I do in the morning before I meditate is make my bed. Now, that's the first thing I do when I wake up. As soon as I get out the bed, I make my bed. It's a very, very small thing, but this is something that was reinforced to me through my upbringing. My dad, my mom, make your bed. So even though it's a very small thing and the first thing I do in the morning, but to me, in my mind, me going back in my room as I get ready to meditate, it translates as in, I have one success under my belt today.
Exactly. It sets the stage for what's happening that day, and it's being aware of there are core areas of my life that I continue to accomplish. And it could be something as simple as starting the day, but how I start my day. Because how I start my day gives me a certain sense of calmness, which is part of my wellness. And as you said, when you take time then to use strategies, would be meditation. Even during meditation, you're doing visualization.
Right.
When I visualize myself helping my future patients, that gives me motivation and also gives me a sense of I can accomplish that journey, right?
Exactly.
So it, again, all ties in together. These rituals of, for example, am I going to the gym? Certain people like to prepare certain types of food and have certain food during the course of the day. And I know we'll get into this in part of our last part, moving toward a game day strategy, but it opens the door for what I call the ergonomics of success. But you're letting us know that there's actually evidence-based research that in essence is called, what is your ritual? It's a ritual that actually supports your wellness.
Right.
I was calling it, what our ergonomics are any area of our life that creates comfort. So I'm trying to make sure you have comfort in your success.
Right.
Are you comforted because you are well? Are you comforted because you did your workout? Are you comfortable or comforted because you did your meditation? All of these things give you a sense of readiness, as you were saying, and now you can perform in whatever that area that you're desiring. In this case, it may be a high stakes assessment like the MCAT.
Right. And it's compound returns, because making the bed, that's one deposit. That's one drop in the imaginary happiness bucket. Then it sets the tone for a positive mindset to meditate. Then I come out of my meditation feeling like I did really well, Then I drive over to the gym and I listen to my affirmations in the morning. That sets the tone for me to go into the gym and, just dog out my workout. Each of those things, I'm adding a deposit into that happiness jar, which then increases my confidence to actualize how I see myself in that day, whether or not it be acing this exam or, providing the best care to my patients. But all of this adds to that confidence, right? So those ritualized preparations, 30% increase in emotional readiness. And the last thing when we talk about like logistical aspects is like
Yes.
exposure based CBT, right? So in the sense of the psych world, we talk about exposure based CBT as, introducing to some increment level the patient to certain triggers, through the cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Exposing them to a particular trigger and getting them more comfortable with it. So in the essence of how that looks in your exam preparation, well, the day before your exam, have you traveled to the actual testing location? When you picked your testing location, did you see what floor the prometric site is at? Is it on the 6th floor? So because this gives you information about how you are going to plan for your breaks. Do you have enough time? If I'm setting out a 10-minute break, do I have enough time to, leave out the building, catch the sun, the sun rays for a couple of minutes and get back in and still be confident that I have enough time in breaks throughout the remainder of my exam. All of these things cuts down on having the unknown or the variables that could very well come up during exam day on game day creep in. So when you're doing your simulated exams, such as all the drills that you had me do, hey, DJ, every morning you're going to start off with one block. This could be 8 weeks out. Then as we get closer to the exam, we're going to start with 2 blocks, 3 blocks. This gets you exposed to the academic rigor of sitting and taking an exam for X amount of hours. I'm not sure how long the MCAT is nowadays, but this gets you used to sitting for this extended amount of time. It gives you that academic resiliency, that academic stamina to sit there. So having that exposure therapy as part of your framework, when does that work? Am I doing simulated exams every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, or how do I space that out? These are very good practices to add into your longitudinal framework. And, you can give us a little bit more spiel about how that works from, your personal experience with dealing with, advising students.
Yes. So as we begin to transition to what we might refer to as now your game day strategy, right? Because everything we've been talking about up to this point is part of a large plan of action of wellness. Starting strong and setting that mindset for success incorporates now an understanding of how do I anchor myself in wellness. I anchor it, we are suggesting, with GPS. First, know that you have to have a growth mindset. You must keep your purpose and relevance in front of you. You must have created a sense of belonging through your mentors, through your peers. All right, so now you have your GPS anchor ready to go. With that, what is going to be the pre-exam, if you will, pre-exam rituals? Because we've learned that through rituals, you can actually optimize your emotional readiness. So some rituals, it depends on the person. Maybe I'm going to incorporate the gym wellness. Every morning, that's going to happen leading up to the exam. Others, it might be meditation. Others, it might be a walk. Others, it might be yoga. Whatever it is for you, if you're developing a longitudinal plan leading up to the exam test day, what does that look like as one of your rituals, right? And you may have a few rituals that you're doing each day. On exam day, right? That's going to be very important. We should have already practiced a few rituals 2-3 days before exam day that say, on exam day, this is what I'm going to eat, for example, throughout the day. When I take my breaks, will I take one long break for lunch, or will I take short breaks throughout the day and have certain types of snacks?
Right.
Have I practiced that pre-exam ritual and game day ritual at least 3 to 4 times before the actual exam day.
Right.
Because that would be something I evaluate when I look at your plan of action.
Right.
My exam day is on a Saturday, so 4 Saturdays before your actual Saturday exam day, have you actually practice what that day is going to be like, both from taking an exam, both from your wellness breaks, both from what you do when you get up in the morning, and also what you do after the exam. Have you been to the testing site, as you said?
Right.
And also, in addition to your pre-exam rituals and then the exam day ritual that you're going to plan out and practice, what about some of those somatic checks that you talked about? Those somatic checks that actually, are you in tune with yourself physically to notice any signs of excessive stress that need to be brought back into balance with one of the wellness strategies that you've talked about? Are you monitoring that longitudinally leading up to the exam day? And do you have someone else helping you monitor that, which would be great, keeping that sense of belonging? On exam day, when you take your breaks, sometimes on that day, it's a little stressful. When you take that break and you go to the restroom, how do I look? How do I feel? What can I do in a couple of minutes? That breathing that you talked about does not take very long. That can be applied on exam day. And if we've been practicing it before exam day, it has become an intentional behavior, a ritual that the evidence-based research has shown can keep me in position of wellness, which then optimize my performance.
Exactly.
Those are the types of recommendations we're looking at before exam day, moving up to it, and exam day rituals, somatic checks to incorporate all of our wellness.
And this is a good point to pivot where we talk about our last longitudinal strategy and what that looks like. And this ties into, the P of GPS, but purpose alignment. And what we talk about here is the purpose pause, right? Asking yourself, why the MCAT? Why medicine? What is a part of your background or your history or your story that connects you to this field, this altruistic field that we call being a physician, right? And so as the research has shown, this anchors you into practices to reduce burnout and to keep you aligned with your goals. But it also brings up this thing that we talk about in the psych world called the hope module, right? And so when we talk about the hope module, I had a attending during my first year of residency say, we can treat depression. We can treat depression with all the different classes of medications from the SSRIs, SNRIs, TCAs, you name it. But we can't treat demoralization.
Interesting.
And really challenged me to think about the difference between depression and demoralization. So when you have demoralization, you have a denial to yourself of hope. You can be depressed and still know that there's a silver lining at the end of the tunnel. But when you are demoralized, that door is completely shut. And we see this even from a community standpoint where, if we have communities that perceives themselves to be in this constant state of helplessness,
yes,
no matter how I turn, what I do, what moves I make to advance, to succeed, there's always an obstacle that continues to put me back at a negative position, right? You begin to get this hopelessness. And when you don't have hope, a lot of that is hinged on the fact that you don't feel purpose, right?
That's right.
And so when you continue to align your purpose with why you're doing this, as hard as studying for the MCAT is, as tiring as that process may be, as many hours as it may deny you from your family and loved ones and friends, and the FOMO that it may give from you missing out on certain activities. But when you are aligning your purpose through this, activity of a purpose pause, right?
I love it.
You are allowing yourself to step away from more academic or wellness saboteur, you know, because you are allowing yourself to see you as the physician and give yourself the purpose as to why you're doing this. Because when you don't have the purpose, you don't have the hope. And that can lead to demoralization, which is something that's very, very difficult to
And
treat.
everything collapses, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And as you said, it all comes in. There's avoidance behavior. So we're not preparing for the MCAT. We just walk away. There's sometimes depression.
Right.
I just can't do it. And the saboteur just has a field day.
Mm-hmm.
But if we have a purpose pause, an intentional behavior,
Right.
again, where am I going?
Right.
And that connects back to the GPS, because sometimes that purpose pause, as you said, it can be for ourselves in that moment. And sometimes the purpose pause can be, let me call DJ. DJ, you got a moment? Yeah. Man, this was rough, but I just thought about, I'm seeing us, practicing together in the community. Yeah, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. We're gonna
Right.
get that community health clinic together.
Right.
That purpose pause
Right.
reconnects you.
And invigorates you.
Invigorates you.
Yeah.
And then when I have that sense of community, I can come back, right?
Right.
Hopefully, a scholar may even say, you know what? I'm going to take a break because it's kind of rough. I need to go back to that FS and just hear some good encouragement
Right.
as a purpose pause.
Exactly.
So I can continue on in my journey.
Right. And, you know, this discussion, as we continue to build upon it, we're now entering into our third part of the discussion, which is game day wellness.
Yes.
Right. How does that framework, GPS, the longitudinal strategies that we discussed over your dedicated MCAT study period, how does that look now leading up to, and now we're on game day? And I'm going to let you take the driver's seat on this one, as someone who's given thousands and thousands of students advising around
The game
MCAT,
day, yes.
boards, shelf exams, all of the high stakes medical and pre-medical exams. What are some of your top game day strategies for wellness practice for our students?
Thanks, DJ. And so we earlier in our conversation touched on some of these points, but let's reaffirm them again.
Right.
Game day always requires us to have preparation. So you still prepare for game day. So this game day set of strategies reminds us first, as we noted, what's going to be the ritual for the day. What is going to be our ritual from the time we wake up to the time we depart to the testing center, from the time we arrive, throughout the day, and what's going to happen afterwards. Now, that's a loop. Let's look at that loop very insightfully.
Okay.
When we wake up, what is going to be your wellness anchor? Is it going to be the meditation? Is it going to be the workout? Is it going to be a connection with a trusted mentor for a final word of encouragement for a few moments? That's going to be the first point in that day. That's going to set the tone for your day.
Right.
What is going to be now my diet, right? Again, think about that in the morning, because you are saying to your body, this is the fuel we're going to have that's going to take us through the day. We are preparing with these strategies to mitigate any potential distraction, whether it's a wellness distraction or some other distraction that could take us away from success. So in thinking through what's the meal plan before we leave and what is it going to be throughout the day to sustain the energy we need to actually think, is going to be important. Next, what's going to be our plan to and from the testing center? Now, some of us are very independent, and we can handle, by independence, I mean that we can handle, I'll get myself to the testing center. But some of us would like to have someone just drop us off and bring us back.
Right.
We don't even want to have to think about driving because there's the nuance of traffic. There's other things that can be distracting. We're trying to remain calm.
Or you do like I do and get a hotel room right next to the testing
Absolutely.
site,
As you know, that's one of my core recommendations. I love for scholars to get a hotel room very close. If you can find one within walking distance of your testing center, that's ideal, because the goal is to be there 24 hours before, to be relaxed, the next day get up and simply walk there, or have a short Uber transport, etc. right there, so that, again, you can remain calm. Now we're at the center, all right? Remember, pre-exam, you have been to this center already before, at least 24 hours before, preferably maybe one time before that, so you can get a sense of the layout, as you said, where the restrooms are. When I do my breaks, will I be able to go outside if I like to have air and sun? All these are important. I had one scholar at a particular center that we won't mention. When you leave the building on Saturdays, the doors lock and you can't get back in. And the scholar unfortunately went into a panic because that took all of their break time to finally get someone to come down and let them back in. Fortunately, they had other backup strategies we had talked about in the event when things go wrong. How do you recenter yourself?
Man, that's a big one.
That's a big one, because during the exam, something can happen. There must be what we call parallel strategies for success in wellness and also in thinking, because we are going to push through that exam to the end.
Right.
And I'll come back to that one. So we've looked at our breaks. We've looked at logistics, where we're going to be. Now we're in the actual exam. We have to think again about, what is my testing strategy for the questions? And we're going to touch that in the next FS. We're going to touch on that. So I'll just mention that now. That's a ritual of how you execute on your testing strategy. And then we talked about, well, what if things aren't going right with your testing strategy? There's a parallel strategy for that. That's next FS. But if you're having wellness concerns, we may need to take a break, and we should be thinking about, what is going to be my recentering wellness strategy? Will it be the breathing that you talked about? Will it be a purpose pause that we talked about?
Throwing cold water on your face.
Throwing cold water on your face, right.
You going back
what
in.
will it be? We want you to map it out.
Right.
So you are ready. You are preparing for what I call academic success on that game day. And it is like a, for lack of a better framing, a military operation.
Right.
But this military operation has a positive outcome. And that positive outcome is you navigating wellness and thinking and testing strategies throughout the day, and winding up with an outstanding score based on the efforts that you put in. So we're looking at that piece throughout the rest of the day as well. What are those backup wellness strategies, testing and thinking strategies? We'll get into the next FS. And when you depart, now that the day is over, this is an underestimated aspect of wellness.
It is.
Some of us, as we know, all of a sudden we're going to run through the entire exam in our head, and we're going to look things up. And you know what that is? That's the saboteur talking. The saboteur says, oh, you better go look at this and look at that. And again, you'll all of a sudden find yourself in a spiral. I call it a vortex. Right. A vortex with the saboteur, and he's just twisting you around. And now you're just feeling horrible for the next week or two,
right.
Maybe 3 weeks.
However long it takes to get those scores back.
Exactly.
You're going back to questions. And keep in mind, you're mostly remembering all of the difficult areas during the exam that you had. You know, with a test that's like over how many questions are on the MCAT?
That MCAT, in each section, you have approximately 59 questions per section. So that's a lot of questions.
A lot of
to get
questions.
To across 4 sections.
So for, you know, a reasonable estimation, you probably have done or didn't, you know, have many, you know, horrible points in each of those, you know, blocks with questions. But your mind is fixating on the few questions that you did have to like sit and really think about, or that gave you a challenge, which then activates that saboteur to have you looking up questions, you know, worrying and fretting about the results of your exam over the 3 weeks, instead of saying, I did my best, I prepared, and the outcome will be the outcome.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you have over 200 questions, and maybe you're perseverating or focusing on 20 or 30 questions that are sticking in your mind across 200 questions. Well, you know, that's a smaller chunk of the questions. And you may have navigated half of those accurately, which is still going to put you in a very strong position, as you say, when you look at the evidence, the facts, versus the distortion that the saboteur has you in. So let's have a post-exam plan of action, which is what is going to be my fun time, my wellness time. Some of us are like, I'm going to go home and I'm just going to relax and take a great nap. That's great. After you have that good nap, I want you to think about what you're going to get up and do for fun. It could be staying at home and watching a movie with a friend. It could be going out, or you may go out right after
Right.
the exam and have a nice meal with some friends, et cetera, et cetera. But plan that as part of your exam day strategy to have some great wellness and reconnection and fellowship with friends and family after the exam, so the saboteur doesn't sneak in and says, "Oh, you're by yourself.
Right.
And would you like to think about the exam? I would like to think about it with you too." And all of a sudden you get into that vortex. So as we wrap up that exam day strategy, having a plan of action for what you're doing before the exam,
Oh yeah.
during the exam, and after the exam is going to be key for our success and for our wellness.
Right. And I think that post exam, period is very underscored in, our assessment and a part of our strategies for being intentional, to plan. Because while the adrenaline gets you through the exam, before you know it, a 5 hour, 9 hour, 2 day exam is over. But that 3 weeks after the exam, when you're waiting for the scores, can really tear you up. So you have to be intentional on even your strategies for that post-exam period. I'm glad you brought that up. So this allows us to close out our facilitated session today by debunking the myths. So I'm going to read a myth, right? I'm going to tackle a myth from one of our online forums, and I want you to give your perspective on it. You ready?
Okay.
Okay. Quote, only 520 plus scores get in. You should work nonstop, end quote.
Absolutely false. Absolutely false. And that links us back to what you talked about, this performance driven context in medicine, especially in the pre-med journey. And unfortunately, our scholars get burnt out by some myth related to a performance outcome.
Right.
In fact, we have hundreds and hundreds of scholars who are admitted to medical school, if you're focusing only on the MCAT score, who are admitted to a medical school with scores starting at 507, which would put the scholar around the 72nd percentile rank and on up. And so the goal is to reframe it. What's my purpose? As you said, my purpose is to ultimately be a great problem solver for my patients. And so therefore my goal is to do as well as I can, which hopefully will be a score that will be considered with my other credentials for consideration of medical school admission. And yes, we recognize that there are certain scores that are considered more competitive, but we have to be able to look at this individually with our mentor and frame what is an actual reasonable score and then shoot for a score beyond that. Right. And we have to anchor that in fact.
So yeah, that I would say my perspective is that that statement is a trap, right? And it fuels imposter syndrome and perfectionism. You're talking about a 520 plus. That puts you what, at 90%?
No, that's like the 96th percentile rank. That's almost
rank.
A perfect score.
Right. So when if you're going into your exam prep already because you've just come off of this online thread saying that 520 or nothing, you don't get in, right? And you may have taken a practice exam, your baseline score to see where you are, and you're far from a 520. And in your mind, how do I even get to a 520 in this 8 weeks, in this 12-week period, right? It becomes something that's so distant and hopeless, of a feat that now you have, this saboteur running its muck throughout your entire period. And so we want to reinforce that a balanced approach of not only strategy and skill and that skill of learning how to learn, and we'll talk about that in our next facilitated session, but also the wellness, the thing that anchors you into the why. Why am I even taking this exam is the thing that really improves your performance on these high stakes exam and overall as being a doctor. So we'll wrap there, and we just want to remind our student doctors to go onto our website where they can download the MCAT Wellness and Stress Management Planner. And this thing we have for download PDF format, and it anchors this GPS mindfulness and wellness framework. Excellent. In a nice worksheet that our scholars can follow along with and track their success throughout their study period. And if you are a part of a pre-med or advising group, we would love for you to share this episode with your friends and your colleagues. And also, let's start a discussion in the comment section about what's your wellness strategies around your preparation for the MCAT or any other high stakes exams. Okay, so we'll end here. I think this was a extraordinary conversation, powerful conversation, yes, about where we need to start our MCAT prep with.
Yes, starting strong with that wellness mindset.
Yes, but I want you to give us an introduction to our next facilitated session that's coming up.
DJ, now the next one is where scholars love to focus, but this is the anchor for success in the next one, which is navigating the MCAT maze. Mastering the blueprint of the MCAT from the perspective of its structure, the required thinking skills, and then we can apply specific strategies for success.
Right. And, you know, through our conversation today, if you find that stress is not holding you back, it could be the strategy portion. And so that's the reason why our next facilitated session will be very powerful. Again, another powerful conversation for your preparation for the MCAT. So we'll see you over at our next facilitated session starting soon.
Looking forward.